disaster recovery, failover systems, DDoS protection, and etc. So I'm going to give you a brief story about myself because for those of you who are joining, I said today we're going to be talking about getting into cybersecurity, right? So I'm just going to give you an introduction about myself and what I do and how I got into the field. So I'm a cybersecurity officer. I mean, in security, you hear a lot of roles. You know, every organization, every company, everywhere you work, you know, they come up with roles which, you know, just have, you know, different names, right? So I'm a security person and I have a niche in cloud security, right? So in the course of this of this session, we're going to look at different specializations and you know see how to get into these specializations. So I've had a very unconventional entry into security. Oh, you can't see my screen. Oh, sorry about that. Just let me know when it comes up.
It's up.
All right, cool. Thank you. Sorry about that. So I was talking about myself, and I said I've had a very unconventional entry into security. And by unconventional, I mean I don't have what's it called? A grass to grace story of security, right? Contrary to a lot of people, you know, people enter into security from different backgrounds, right? So security is a field where I always tell people the barrier towards entry is almost non-existent, which means security requires diverse set of skills. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, it doesn't matter the kind of job you know, the things you've done in the past. I mean, it requires you to just, you know, learn the basics and then you can get into security. So I didn't have an unconventional background. As a matter of fact, I had a very technical background. I studied computer science in the university and I was pretty good at it. I finished top of my class. And, you know, yeah, so in the course of my computer science degree, I had a passion for networking, right? So I used to, you know, I had an affinity for networking. So every time they're talking about networking courses or anything regarding networking, I was always there, right? So I think I kind of liked networking. So that was a field I was interested in. I mean, I did little bit of programming, right? Of course, if you do computer science, you have to learn how to code at some point, right? So I did that. And after I left university, um, quite, I mean, things kind of took a turn. I didn't work as an IT person. I I got a job as a petroleum engineer. I mean, that's a story for another day, but I was out of the field entirely. So I was working in an oil and gas servicing company. And COVID happened, and I mean, things kind of got stalled, and I had to make a U-turn. So I had to get back into IT, and I'm like, okay, how about I go back to something that I would see as I consider as future proof, right? I mean, I had a background, I studied computer science, so it wasn't going to be a difficult thing for me to, you know, go back into the field. So during the lockdown period, I had to try to, you know, take refresher courses and try to bring myself up to speed with things that are happening. And then I got back into IT. So I think at the time I did a Google IT support professional course. And after that course, I applied for jobs. I got my first job as an IT support guy. And I don't know how many of you are familiar, but at the startup, actually, if you're an IT support guy, I mean, the kind of job I was essentially the IT department. So I was doing, you know, I was doing things, you know, with servers. I was doing networking. I was configuring firewalls. I mean, I was doing pretty much everything an IT department should do, right? And that was just me. So it was easy for me because I had the background already, right? So that was how I got in. Now I did IT support because I mean I knew how to, you know, tear down computers, tear down computers, build computers back up. I knew how to troubleshoot computer issues. And it's funny how everything I know about computers, I don't think I learned them in a formal setting, right? I've always had computers growing up at a very young age. So I learned everything I knew about computers by spoiling a lot of computers. So when I try something and I mess it up so bad, I know that, okay, next time you don't try this because this is what's going to happen. So that's how I learned how to, fix computer related issues. And I mean, back in university as well, if you used to play games as much as I used to do, you discover that you have computers where they tell you that you need a specific graphic card, right, to run some kind of games. And then when you eventually run some kind of games, you try to play the game and the game does not start. And what happens? It kind of tells you that, oh, maybe some DirectX is missing. And then you have to go to the registry and change some keys. And then you have to do a whole lot of stuff. I feel like all of these experiences I had with my own personal computer, and then all of these things shaped my career and my entry points into doing IT support at a large organization, right? Because then I used to also support friends, colleagues, people who have issues installing their games to play. Then where we used to play FIFA, God of War, and the like. So any type of game you want to play on your laptop, when people run into these issues, the game is not starting because of one error the computer is giving them. I look at this area and try to figure out what the error is saying, and I help them fix their issues. All of these I learned from my own computer, right? So when I got into corporate space, pretty much every issue that people come to me to complain about, I have experienced them once in my life. So every time people come and say, "Oh, this is not working. I tried to do this, my screen just this way and everything." I just like, okay, you know what? I'll fix it. So yeah, I did IT support for a while, and from a startup, I moved to a much larger organization where I was supporting, I mean, hundreds of people, right? So at a much larger scale. At this point, responsibilities became bigger. I was, fixing things regarding printers and print servers. PS, I still hate printers till date, right? Every time there's a printer issue, I run away from it. But yeah, I mean, I was doing that at the time, a whole lot of issues. And I did IT support for a while and I got bored. And I'm like, okay, I know IT support, right? What's next? What do I think I should do next? And I discovered that, oh, when you were in school, you had this passion for networking. And since I worked with a multinational, we had a networking team, right? And every time there's an issue, everybody always ran to one guy because we had just one network engineer for Nigeria. This is for a multinational that had at least 13 office locations in Nigeria. I mean, that's not counting several other African countries where they operate, right? So I'm like, why is it every time there's an issue, everybody runs to one guy? I mean, he was a network engineer. Why don't you, try and, bring back your networking skills essentially and learn networking and see if you can transition into the role as a network engineer? And so, yeah, I picked it up. I started doing networking that's still in my IT support role. I started solving networking related problems. So every time people complain about networks or network related issues, fine, I didn't have the access to, log into switches and configure switches, but at least I knew what the problem was because I had the foundation already. So I knew what the problem was, and whenever I'm reaching out to the network engineer, I reached out to him with an idea of what the problem was. So I kind of saved him the stress of troubleshooting, right? So I just told him this is what I think the problem is, and every time or most times when he checked, he actually discovered, okay, yeah, this was what the problem was rather. And so I did that, and an opportunity came. They needed a network engineer, and I applied for the role. I did an interview. I was able to demonstrate that, yeah, I know networking because I've solved network related problems. And then I got the job and I became a network engineer. And eventually, the network engineer who was there before me resigned and left the company. So I was left alone. So at that point, I had big shoes to fill and I had to up my game. I took the CCNA and I passed my CCNA on my first attempt, and the rest is history. So I did networking. I mean, I was a network engineer for a large organization. At some point, my reach expanded. I began supporting not just Nigeria, I mean, not just one office location, rather, but I became the network engineer for Nigeria, right, covering 13 office locations. And I mean, my reach extended and they added Ghana to me, they added Tanzania, and they added some other African countries. So I was one of two network engineers for the whole of Africa. So I did networking, and at some point again, I became bored with networking, right? And at this point, I started taking on serious stuff, right? Because as a network engineer, you connect things together, and when your server engineers have problems, they always come to you. So I had no choice than to learn about servers. I started building servers, doing practice labs. I had a very, very large system that had 32 gig of RAM. So I could spin up a lot of virtual machines and practically play around stuff,
Ah,
right? So I learned about servers and I started solving problems for people and several other people. And, the thing with networking is even when software engineers build applications and the application is not working correctly, they tend to blame the network. I mean, it's pretty much when you write an application and it's not loading or it's slow, everybody blames the network. But because I was good at my job, I always debunked all that statement and tried to give them evidence as to why it's not network. And I just told them, you know what, you just wrote a shitty application. Just go back and check what you wrote and stop blaming my network, right? So, I mean, that was pretty much it. So after networking, I decided that, okay, you know what, I want to transition into security. And I applied for a role. I mean, my first security job I applied for, I got interviewed and I got the job essentially. And so I got into security. Now, that was my first security job. The reason why I got that job was because I've had a lot of transferable skills over the course of my career. Now, as a network engineer, security is your primary responsibility as well, because you have to protect the network you're
ah,
building, right? You have to protect the network you're designing. So I worked with a lot of firewalls. I worked with a lot of intrusion detection systems and all of that stuff. So when I did my interview, it was more like I had more experience than even people who were in the security field, because there are a lot of security engineers who have never configured a firewall, who have never done stuff relating to, security appliances, right? So I feel like that was what gave me an edge, and that was why I got the job. And a lot of transferable skills. I mean, I forgot to even mention that while at my job as a security, as a network engineer, I was also doing stuff relating to the cloud, right? So I was reviewing resources, I was deploying resources in the cloud. So I took all of these skills to add to my current skill as a network engineer because I knew where I was heading to, right? So I knew where I wanted to get to. So I had to add these extra skills. And yeah, that's pretty much how I got into security. And right now I am specializing in cloud, particularly with AWS, and that's what I do. So yeah, that's my story of how I got into security. Now, what are common misconceptions about cybersecurity, right? Please also confirm if you can still see my screen. So these are the common misconceptions about security. One, it's all about hacking. Uh, well, I mean, I don't blame people, right? Because every time people mention security, the first thing that comes to mind is hacking. Everybody wants to hack, everybody wants to break into systems, because obviously that's what looks appealing to the eyes. You watch a lot of movies where you see somebody sit on a computer, open a terminal and do a ping command and tells you I'm in 2 seconds, right? So it's glamorous. Hacking seems fun, but I'm here to tell you that security is not just all about hacking, right? It
yeah.
involves a lot more than that: risk management, compliance and governance, security awareness, etc. So security is not all about hacking. And for people in the field or people who seem to have an idea, people say compliance equals security. Well, I mean, when you're compliant with laws, regulations, and frameworks, it can help to an extent. It kind of provides some baseline security for you, but it does not equal security, because while this sets a baseline, it does not guarantee full security. So additional measures should be taken, to address evolving threats. Some people also feel security is all about technical skills. Well, it's good to know how to break into servers. It's good to know how to break into break APIs. It's good to know how to configure firewalls. It's good to know how to, you know, perform forensics on, stolen drives and find out all the steps the attacker took. But as much as those skills are important, there are technical skills that are also important. You know, soft skills are also important. Things like documentation, how did you arrive at your troubleshooting step? How did you arrive at this solution, right? Communication. How are you going to tell your management team the need to purchase a security solution? How are you going to convince management on the need to invest in a cybersecurity program? These are soft skills. How are you going to train people, which is awareness? I mean, you may be technical, but you may not be able to pass that same knowledge to people, right? So, how are you going to tell people about security? How are you going to tell people about social engineering and the tons of other ways people, kind of, break into systems and, exfiltrate data, right? So, soft skills are as important as technical skills. And that's one of the reasons people don't get jobs because a lot of people fail interviews because they don't know how to sell their technical skills. Yes, I know you broke into NASA, but if you can't communicate, I don't think you're going to have a very, very good career. Some people also say security is only for IT professionals. Do you have an edge if you have an IT background? Of course, you have an advantage. But I always tell people everything in this life can be learned. Everything can be learned. I studied computer science. I became a petroleum engineer. I learned it. I learned on the job, right? And then I go back to IT. So um, it's not just for it's just not for IT professionals. Security is for everyone, irrespective of your background. You have a lot of transferable skills. I mean, if you in the cloud, they always tell you stuff about security being the shared responsibility, right? You have your own part to play. Your cloud provider has his own part to play. If you're a security engineer in an organization, you have your own part to play. Your staff, your employees, your colleagues also have their own parts to play, right? So everybody has parts to play in security. So one other misconception is once you secure something, it is permanently stay safe. Well, unfortunately, that's not how it works in security. The fact that you've put up intrusion prevention systems, configured your firewalls and configured every solution you have out there does not mean that it's going to be safe forever. The reason is because there are people whose bread and butter is finding ways to break things, right? There are people who just wake up every day and one of their mission is just to compromise all the tools you've set in place, right? So vulnerabilities emerge all the time, which requires continuous monitoring, continuous improvement. So once you secure something, it doesn't mean it's safe forever. So these are just few of the misconceptions in security. Now, what are the common areas of expertise in security? This is a non-exhaustive list. I mean, if you check online and check several sources, you'd see that there are many more areas of expertise in security. So I just try to, merge most of them into like some of these categories, right? So there is network security, there is security engineering, there is application security, there is cloud security, there's security operations, there is incident response and forensics, and then there is governance, risk and compliance, and several other careers or areas of expertise in security, right? So I mean, most of them are self-explanatory. Network security just involves securing your networks, right? Your networking, I mean, a lot of organizations have networks, right? I mean, most of the attacks happen over networks, obviously, right? So things get compromised over a network. So you have a network, how do you secure it? How do you secure a network perimeter, right? By having things like firewalls, having a demilitarized zone, and several other controls you have in place, configuring rules for your firewalls. So that's essentially what network security entails. Security engineering, this role mostly requires people with programming experience because most of the security tools we have today were built by security engineers. So people who have programming knowledge who just want to implement security tools, right? So most of the tools you use are written by security engineers essentially. So security engineering involves writing tools, building tools essentially. Application security, I mean, you have web applications, you have mobile applications, right? So these are people who protect your applications, who, kind of ensure that those applications you're building, some of us want to have startups in the future, right? You want to solve problems, you want to be the next Uber, you want to be the next Facebook, you want to be the next Netflix, right? When you build your applications, you need people who are versed in application security to test that, okay, this application you've built is ready to go live, is ready to have users download and use them, right? How do we come from an attacker's point of view? What are things that people will try to do to compromise the application? You know, there are a lot of vulnerabilities out there, things like SQL injection, SQL injection, so to say, cross-site scripting, and the likes. OWASP has a very, very good documentation about this. So that's what application security is. Cloud security. These days, the cloud has become a buzzword. Everybody wants to do cloud. Everybody saves things in the cloud. Everybody wants to have things in the cloud, right? The cloud security is another interesting area of expertise in security because you are having.
Okay, so
I I have to mute somebody. So please just always check your mic if you're muted. Sorry about that. Now, cloud security, you have people who just try and protect resources in the cloud because the cloud is essentially provisioning resources in another person's data center, in another person's server room. So you don't have physical access to them. You just have access to them via an API call you make on your web browser, right? Which is much about cloud security. So with cloud security comes identities because how do you get into your cloud provider? How do you provision your resources? You provision them with an identity. So that's why in cloud security, things like IAM, identity and access management, is a very, very, very big area that people specialize in as well. So that's one interesting area. Security operations, these are people who eat logs for a living, right? So security operations, we have a lot of security tools and everything generates logs, right? And these logs get aggregated into one tool, and then the security operations guys look through volumes of logs, look for things that actually pose threats, and then look for things that are just just noise essentially. So they filter noise from the real world events, right? And then they pass it on to people who would actually do more triaging and say, okay, this is an incident we need to respond to. Now, incident response and forensics. What happens when you suffer a breach? What happens when somebody breaks into your server, right? What do you do? That's what incident response is all about. How do you react to this? Forensics. How do you investigate what the attacker did after he compromised your server, your network? I mean, that's essentially it. Then GRC, I respect these guys so much. As much as I hate that field, I respect them so much because they are one of the only people who have three roles in one. They have governance, they have risk, and they have compliance. Only them. I respect them a lot. So, I mean, governance is a very, very big part of security. I may just banter about how much I hate it because it's a whole lot of work. So, governance guys do policy implementations. What's your policy in the company? How do you mitigate risk? What's your risk appetite? How do you treat risk? What are the things, the tolerance levels of the organization? How do you comply with industry standards, regulation? Do you store card data? What does PCI DSS say about that? What's your information security management system? What does GDPR in Europe, or what does the NDPA, Nigerian Data Protection Act, say about handling customer data? I mean, that's where the GRC guys come in. So yeah, this is just off the top of my head, some of the common areas of expertise, which you are going to eventually, find a niche and specialize in, right? So I do cloud security for the most of it, but the nature of my job demands I know everything here. So I do network security too. I do security engineering at some point. I do application security. I do everything here practically, right? So, but I have a niche. I have an area of specialty. So yeah, that's that about it.